invited to my son's 12th wedding anniversary. After 4 years of silent divorce, I thought this was the moment my family could finally heal. I was wrong. Right in the middle of the party, he pointed straight at me and declared, "Let's congratulate my mother for successfully throwing away the most rotten and disgusting debt she ever had. My dad." The crowd erupted in laughter. Some applauded, others whispered. Meanwhile, in the shadowed corner of the party, I could only stand in silence smiling. But inside, a decision was forming. 3 seconds later, I pulled out my phone. 3 taps. That was all it took. My son's phone vibrated. When he glanced down at the screen, his smile vanished and his face went pale. That was the moment everything he had came crashing down. I am deeply grateful you were here with me today. Before we begin, I have a quick question. How did you find this story? Did YouTube recommend it to you, or did a friend share it? Drop a comment below and let me know. I read every single one, and your answer helps me understand what brings people to these stories. Also, a gentle heads up. This narrative weaves together real experiences with creative storytelling, designed to illustrate deeper lessons. While certain details have been shaped for clarity and impact, the insights I hope to share with you remain genuinely valuable. The lamp on the side table cast a warm glow across the living room, but the house still felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from winter air seeping through old windows. The kind that settles in when there's no one left to come home to. I sat in the leather armchair I'd bought 20 years ago, back when Angela still cared about furniture and decorating and making the house feel like a home. Now it was just mine. The chair, the lamp, the silence. My name is Thomas Blackwood. I'm 67 years old. For 40 years, I was an architect. I designed office buildings, community centers, a few schools. Nothing famous. Nothing that would make the news. But I was proud of the work. I built things that lasted. 4 years ago, my wife left me. Angela. We had been married for 42 years. She said she couldn't do it anymore. Said she needed to be free. I didn't fight her. What would have been the point? You can't make someone stay when they've already left in every way that matters. 8 months later, she married Daniel Rowan. He's 48, 15 years younger than her. I heard they met at a yoga class. I don't do yoga. The house feels bigger now, or maybe I just feel smaller in it. I make coffee in the mornings, I read the paper, I take walks around the neighborhood. On Tuesdays, I meet my sister Catherine for lunch. On Thursdays, I volunteer at the community center, teaching a beginner's architecture class to retirees who always wanted to learn. It's a good life, a quiet life. But it's lonely. The loneliness isn't new. I've lived with it for 4 years. I've gotten used to waking up alone, eating dinner alone, watching the 10 o'clock news with no one to comment on it with. What I haven't gotten used to is the silence from my son. I picked up my phone. The screen was dark. The last call from Connor was 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, if I'm being precise. And I am. I've counted. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. 35 years ago, Connor was 5 years old. He came running into the house after his first day of kindergarten, his backpack bouncing on his little shoulders, his sneakers lighting up with every step. He was holding a piece of paper covered in crayon scribbles. He ran straight to me, didn't even take his shoes off. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing blueprints for a project downtown. He climbed onto my lap, almost knocking over my coffee, and shoved the paper in my face. "Daddy, look, I made this for you." It was a drawing, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. Both had big smiles. Above them in shaky letters he'd written, "Me and Dad." The letters were backwards. The proportions were all wrong. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I hugged him. He smelled like crayons and playground mulch and something sweet I couldn't name. Childhood, maybe. This is perfect, buddy. I'm gonna keep this forever." And I did. It's in a box in the attic now, along with all the other drawings he made over the years. The ones he stopped making when he turned 12 and decided art was for little kids. The memories rolled through my mind like a film reel. Connor at 10 learning to play basketball in the driveway. I taught him how to dribble, how to shoot. We'd play until it got too dark to see the hoop. Connor at 15 sitting beside me in the car as I taught him to drive. He was so nervous, he stalled the engine 3 times before we even left the driveway. Connor, at 22, walking across the stage at his college graduation. I stood in the crowd and clapped until my hands hurt. I gave him everything I could. College tuition, $92,000. A master's degree in business, another $31,000. When he and Melissa wanted to buy a house, I put down the down payment, $148,000. When he wanted to start a business, I invested $52,000. It failed after 10 months, but I never asked for the money back. When he needed a car, I bought him one, $32,000. When he got married, I paid for more than half the wedding, $11,700. I kept track, not because I expected him to pay me back, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to know when I looked back that I'd done everything I could. Over the course of 38 years, I gave Connor more than $500,000, $570,000 if you're counting. I thought that was what love meant, giving everything, sacrificing everything, making sure your child had every opportunity you never had. But somewhere along the way, I became the villain in my own son's story. I opened my eyes. The living room came back into focus. The lamp, the empty couch across from me, the silence. The divorce changed everything. Angela didn't just leave me. She took Connor with her, not physically. He was 36 by then, married with 2 kids of his own. But emotionally, he went with her. At first, I thought it was just awkwardness. Divorce is hard on everyone. I figured he needed time to adjust. But then the calls stopped. The invitations stopped. Logan's birthday came and went. I sent a gift. Connor sent it back. I tried calling. He didn't answer. I tried texting. He didn't respond. I asked Catherine if she'd heard from him. She said he was fine, just busy. But I could hear the hesitation in her voice. 3 years, 3 years of silence, 3 years of wondering what I'd done wrong, 3 years of replaying every conversation, every argument, every moment, trying to figure out where I lost him. Angela had remarried. Connor had chosen her side. And I was left here in this house with a drawer full of unanswered texts and a phone that never rang. I didn't understand. Connor used to call me every Sunday. We'd talk about work, about the kids, about nothing in particular. And then one day he just stopped. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd come around, that whatever anger or resentment he was holding on to would fade with time. But it didn't. Over the past 3 years, Connor had changed. I didn't know why. I didn't know what Angela or Daniel or anyone else had said to him. I just knew that the son I'd raised, the boy who used to draw me pictures and play basketball in the driveway, was gone. And in his place was someone who looked at me like I was a stranger. Or worse, like I was the enemy. I thought I'd lost him for good. And then one day, an envelope arrived in the mail. I picked it up off the kitchen counter. Cream-colored paper. Expensive. Formal. The kind of envelope you use for weddings or important announcements. My name and address were printed in elegant script on the front. I opened it. Inside was an invitation. Heavy cardstock. Gold lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 12th wedding anniversary of Connor and Melissa Blackwood. I stared at it for a long time. 12 years. Had it really been that long? The date was 3 weeks away. The location was a place called Silverstone Hall. Formal attire requested. For the first time in 3 years, my son wanted to see me. Or so I thought. The phone screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, displaying nothing but my own reflection. I had been holding it for 10 minutes, thumb hovering over Connor's name, before setting it down on the cold ceramic counter. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed rhythmically, the only sound breaking the silence of my empty house. I told myself it was normal. Sons got busy. They had their own families, their own lives. But somewhere between normal and what I was living through, a line had been crossed, and I could not pinpoint when or how. 2 years earlier, on a Thursday morning in April, I had dialed Connor's number with genuine excitement. Logan was turning 11, and I had already picked out a gift, a model airplane kit we could build together the way Connor and I used to when he was that age. I imagined the three of us hunched over the dining table, glue sticks and balsa wood scattered everywhere. Logan's small hands fumbling with the tiny parts while I showed him how to sand the edges smooth. Connor answered on the 4th ring, his voice flat and tired. "Hey, Dad." "Connor?" I kept my tone light. I was calling about Logan's birthday. It's next week, right? I wanted to make sure I could come by. I've got something special for him. There was a pause long enough that I thought the call had dropped. That's probably not a good idea, Dad. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean he's my grandson? Look, Mom's going to be there. And Daniel. It would be awkward, for everyone. Connor, I don't have any problem with your mother. Or Daniel. If she's comfortable, I already said no, Dad. His voice sharpened. Please respect that. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my living room phone, still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty silence. The model airplane kit sat on the coffee table wrapped in blue paper covered with cartoon rockets. I stared at it for a long time. My son had shut me out of his son's birthday. Not because of a scheduling conflict, not because Logan was sick, but because my presence would be inconvenient. The word echoed in my head. Inconvenient. I did not feel anger, not yet. What I felt was closer to bewilderment, like waking up in a room where all the furniture had been rearranged overnight. 18 months later, the bewilderment deepened. Catherine called me on a Tuesday evening in late October. I had just finished reheating leftover soup when my phone buzzed. Thomas, have you seen Connor's post? Well, what post? On social media. You need to look at it. I opened the app with clumsy fingers scrolling until I found Connor's page. His most recent post was pinned at the top, posted 3 hours earlier. Sometimes the hardest part of growing up is realizing that the people you thought loved you were really just controlling you. Freedom feels amazing. No names, no context, just those 2 sentences hanging in the digital void like an accusation. Below the text, 47 people had liked it. 12 had commented. I scrolled through them slowly, each one a small punch to the gut. So proud of you for breaking free. You deserve so much better. It takes courage to cut out toxic people. Toxic. The word stared back at me from the screen, bold and unforgiving. Thomas, Catherine's voice pulled me back. Are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. What the hell is going on? Did you two have a fight? No, we haven't even talked in months. Then why is he posting this? I set the phone down, putting it on speaker, so I could press my palms against the cool granite. I don't know, Catherine. I really don't know. Controlling. The word rolled around in my mind like a marble in an empty jar. Had I been controlling? I thought back to the years of Connor's childhood, the baseball practices I drove him to, the college applications we filled out together, the late-night talks when he struggled with choosing a career path. I had offered advice, sure, pushed him sometimes, but control. That implied something darker, something manipulative. I had only ever wanted him to succeed. Catherine sighed. This doesn't make sense, Thomas. You're the last person who'd try to control anyone. Maybe I did something without realizing it. No, don't blame yourself for something you can't even identify. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, burrowing deep into the soft soil of my uncertainty. The final blow came on a cold morning in early November. Thanksgiving was approaching, and I had decided to reach out again, despite my better judgment. I dialed Connor's number while standing in my kitchen, watching dead leaves tumble across the backyard. The call did not ring. It went straight to voicemail. Connor's voice chipper and automated, "You've reached Connor Blackwood. Leave a message." I hung up and tried again. Same result. A third time. Voicemail. I lowered the phone, slowly staring at the screen as understanding dawned. He had blocked me. My own son had blocked my number. 3 days later, I met Catherine at a coffee shop downtown. She arrived wearing a burgundy scarf, her face tight with concern. We sat in a corner booth away from the afternoon crowd. He blocked me, Catherine. I stirred my coffee mechanically, watching the cream swirl into pale brown spirals. I can't even call him anymore. Catherine set down her cup with more force than necessary. That's ridiculous, Thomas. That's cruel. I've tried everything. I sent gifts. I apologized even though I still don't know what I'm apologizing for. Nothing works. Have you talked to Angela? I shook my head. I didn't want to drag her into this. Catherine leaned back, her expression skeptical. Thomas, I think Angela's already in this. I think she's been in this from the start. Angela wouldn't do that. The words came automatically, a reflex. She's angry with me, sure. The divorce wasn't easy, but she wouldn't turn Connor against me. Are you sure? Because from where I'm sitting, this has her fingerprints all over it. I wanted to argue, to defend my ex-wife, to believe that despite everything between us, she would not weaponize our son. But doubt crept in like fog through a cracked window. Connor's words echoed back. Mom said it would be awkward. Angela had remarried quickly after our divorce to a man 15 years younger. Daniel something. I had never met him. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Thomas let me look into this. I'll talk to some people, see what's really going on. I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing anything. Someone else already did. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Let me help you, please. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe that Connor would come around on his own, that this was just a phase that time would smooth over. But deep down in the place where instinct lives, I knew something was wrong. Something bigger than a son drifting away from his father. Something deliberate. Okay, I said finally, but be careful. Catherine squeezed my hand once before letting go. I will, I promise. As I drove home that evening, the streetlights flickering on one by one in the gathering dusk, I thought about the invisible line that separated estrangement from sabotage. Somewhere in the past 2 years, I had crossed it without even knowing. And on the other side, waiting in the shadows, was a truth I was not sure I wanted to face. Catherine had always been the sharp one in the family. While I built buildings, she built cases. Before she retired, she spent 23 years as a corporate investigator, unraveling embezzlement schemes and tracking down white-collar criminals who thought they were clever enough to cover their tracks. When Catherine decided to dig, she did not stop until she found bedrock. 3 days after our conversation at the coffee shop, she called me from her home office. The room was small, tucked into the second floor of her Victorian house on Oak Street, lined with filing cabinets and framed certificates from her years in the field. Through the window behind her desk, bare tree branches scraped against the glass in the December wind. She had her laptop open, 3 browser tabs glowing on the screen, and a yellow legal pad covered in her tight, precise handwriting. "Or, Thomas, I found something," she said without preamble. I was in my living room halfway through a rerun of a cooking show. I was not really watching. I muted the television and sat up straighter. "What is it?" "Connor's in debt. Serious debt." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and strange. Connor had always been good with money, or at least I thought he had been. He worked for a reputable firm, lived in a nice neighborhood, drove a decent car. Nothing flashy, but nothing that suggested financial trouble either. "How much?" I asked. $245,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? Credit cards, personal loans, and a failed startup investment he made about 18 months ago. He borrowed heavily, and it tanked. Catherine's voice was steady, clinical, the way it always got when she was in investigator mode. I pulled his public records. The house he bought 2 years ago, the one you helped with, was purchased for $485,000. You put down $148,000. He and Melissa came up with $92,000. That left a mortgage of $245,000, which is manageable. So what's the problem? The problem is he took out another loan 6 months later. A second mortgage, basically. Another $245,000. I don't know what he used it for, but it's gone. And now he's drowning. I close my eyes and rub my temples. The number circled in my head like a vulture. $245,000. How does someone accumulate that kind of debt without anyone noticing? Catherine continued. I called in a favor with an old colleague. Gary Morrison, remember him? He did some private investigation work for me back in the day. I asked him to look into Connor's recent activities. Catherine, I don't want you getting in trouble over this. I am not breaking any laws, Thomas, just connecting dots. She paused. Gary found something else. Connor's been meeting with Angela and Daniel every week, Fletcher's Bistro downtown. Same table, same time, Tuesdays at 7. They've been doing this for 6 months. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening street. A dog walker passed under the glow of a street lamp, tugging a golden retriever along the icy sidewalk. Maybe they're just having dinner. I said, though, even as I spoke, I knew how weak it sounded. For 3 hours every single week. And Thomas, you're not invited. Ava's not invited. It's just Connor, Angela, and Daniel. Gary watched them last Tuesday. He said it looked less like a family dinner and more like a strategy session. I did not respond. I could not. Catherine's voice softened. Thomas, I think Angela's rewriting history, making you the villain, and Connor's buying it. The betrayal hit me then, not sharp and sudden like a knife, but slow and spreading like ink soaking into paper. Angela, the woman I had loved for 42 years. The woman I had fought beside during sleepless nights when Connor was colicky as a baby. the woman who had stood beside me at my father's funeral and held my hand while I cried. She was turning our son against me. Or maybe she already had. A week later, Catherine and I met at a diner near the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, just a handful of truckers nursing coffee at the counter, and a tired waitress refilling the sugar dispensers. We sat in a booth by the window, the vinyl seats cracked and patched with duct tape. Catherine slid a manila folder across the table. "Read this." Inside were printouts, bank statements, credit reports, transaction histories. I scanned them slowly each line, adding another layer to the picture Catherine was painting. Connor's debt was laid out in brutal detail, maxed out credit cards, personal loans, with predatory interest rates, a failed tech investment that had swallowed $70,000 in a single quarter. "He's desperate," Catherine said quietly, "and desperate people do desperate things." I looked up at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think he's coming after your trust fund." The words landed like a punch. The trust fund. $500,000 I had set aside for Connor years ago, back when I still believed we would grow old together as a family. The plan had always been to transfer it to him when he turned 45, or sooner, if he truly needed it. It was still in my name legally mine to control. "Catherine, that's exactly what Angela would want," she interrupted. "Think about it, Thomas. If Connor can prove you're an unfit father, or better yet, if he can get you declared incompetent, he can take control of that money now, not in 5 years, now." I shook my head. Connor wouldn't do that. Connor might not, but Angela would. And Daniel's in debt too. I checked. He owes $90,000 on a car loan and another $60,000 in credit card debt. They need money, Thomas. And you're sitting on $500,000 that legally belongs to you, but emotionally belongs to Connor. I stared down at the folder, at the cold, hard numbers that told a story I did not want to believe. My son manipulated and coached. My ex-wife orchestrating a scheme to strip me of my savings. My trust weaponized. Catherine reached across the table and gripped my wrist. "There's one more thing. Connor's boss. A man named Preston Montgomery. I'm looking into him too. There's something off about that connection, but I haven't figured it out yet." I nodded slowly, too numb to ask more questions. That night, I drove home through streets slick with December rain. The wipers scraped rhythmically across the windshield, clearing away water only to have it flood back seconds later. Catherine's words echoed in my head over and over like a song I could not turn off. Angela's rewriting history, making you the villain. I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe there was some other explanation, some misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a single honest conversation. But deep in the hollow space where my certainty used to live, I knew better. Something terrible was coming. I could feel it the way sailors feel, a storm gathering on the horizon, the air pressure dropping the light, turning strange and yellow. 3 weeks later, the invitation arrived. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late February, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a utility bill, cream-colored paper, heavier than ordinary stationery. My name was written across the front in elegant script. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, staring at it before I reached for the letter opener. The paper tore cleanly, and I slid out the card inside. Embossed gold lettering, formal borders. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 12th wedding anniversary of Connor and Melissa Blackwood. Saturday, March 23rd, 6 o'clock in the evening, Silverstone Hall, formal attire." My hands trembled as I read it again. 3 years of silence, and now this, an invitation. A gesture that seemed to say, "Come back. You are wanted here." Or, at least that was what I wanted it to mean. I picked up my phone and dialed Ava. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, everything okay? I got an invitation from Connor to his anniversary party." There was a pause. "Wait, seriously, Dad, that's amazing, right?" "I don't know. Catherine thinks it's a trap." Ava sighed. "Aunt Catherine thinks everything is a trap. She's been suspicious of people since she was 10. She has her reasons," I said quietly. "I know, but Dad, maybe Connor just wants to reconnect. You've been trying for 3 years. If he's finally making an effort, shouldn't you at least see what happens?" I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the window. What if it goes badly? Then at least you tried. You can't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. She was right, of course. Ava was always right about these things. I think I'm going to go, I said. Good, and Dad, be yourself. That's all you can do. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and reread the invitation. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into my wallet, where I would carry it for the next 3 weeks like a talisman. The following Saturday, I drove downtown to a jewelry store I had passed 100 times, but never entered. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and lavender. A young woman greeted me with a practiced smile. Can I help you find something? I need a gift for my daughter-in-law and my son. She led me to a glass case near the back. I looked at bracelets, pendants, earrings, each piece more expensive than the last. Finally, I pointed to a pair of diamond studs, small but brilliant. Those, and I need something for my son too, a watch. She showed me several options. I chose an Omega with a steel band and a navy blue face. At the register, I handed over my credit card and tried not to wince at the total. $4,200 for the earrings, $7,500 for the watch, $11,700. The woman wrapped each item carefully in silver paper and tied them with white ribbon. You're very generous. They're lucky to have you. I managed a small smile. I hope they think so. That evening, I sat at my desk and pulled out cream-colored stationery. I uncapped my fountain pen and began to write. Dear Connor and Melissa, congratulations on 12 years of marriage. I am so proud of the life you have built together. I know things have been difficult between us, but I hope this anniversary marks a new beginning. With all my love, Dad. I read it over 3 times, searching for anything that might sound wrong. Finally satisfied, I folded the note and slipped it into an envelope. The next day, I went to a tailor shop on 5th Street. The place was run by an older man named Frank, who had hemmed my pants for the past 15 years. What can I do for you, Thomas? I need a new suit, something formal, charcoal gray, I think. Frank took my measurements and showed me fabric samples. As he marked the cuffs with chalk, he glanced up. A special occasion. My son's anniversary party. He's lucky to have a father who cares this much. I did not respond. I was not sure luck had anything to do with it. A week before the party, Catherine showed up at my door unannounced. She was carrying a leather folder, the kind she used to bring to depositions. I let her in and poured us both coffee, though I already knew whatever she had come to say would not be good. Thomas, I found something, she said, setting the folder on the kitchen table. About the guest list. I sat down across from her. What about it? She opened the folder and pulled out a printout. A list of names, addresses, RSVPs. I scanned it quickly, recognizing a few Melissa's parents, some of Connor's co-workers, mutual friends from years ago. And then, near the bottom, a name that made my stomach drop. Preston Montgomery. He's going to be there, I asked, my voice tight. Catherine nodded. He's Connor's boss. And Thomas, do you remember what happened 25 years ago? I did. Of course I did. It was not the kind of thing you forgot. In 1999, I had been called to testify in a civil lawsuit against Preston Montgomery, a dispute over construction contracts, allegations of fraud, and falsified permits. I had been brought in as an expert witness, and my testimony had been damning. Preston lost the case. He lost $1.2 million in penalties and damages. And outside the courthouse, as I walked to my car, he had grabbed my arm and leaned in close. You'll regret this, Blackwood. I promise you that. I had brushed it off at the time. Men said things in anger. But now sitting in my kitchen with Catherine's folder spread out in front of me, I wondered if I had been wrong. He hired Connor 2 years ago, Catherine said. Don't you find that suspicious? I don't know. Maybe it's just a coincidence. You don't believe in coincidences. Neither do I. I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion settling into my bones. Catherine, I've waited 3 years for this. I can't let Preston Montgomery stop me from seeing my son. Then I'm coming with you. You weren't invited. I don't care. I'll sit in the parking lot if I have to. But I'm not letting you walk in there alone. I wanted to argue, to tell her I could handle it myself. But the worry in her eyes stopped me. All right, but stay out of sight unless I need you. Deal. The night before the party, I laid everything out on my bed, the new suit pressed and hanging, the silver-wrapped boxes, ribbons still perfectly tied, the envelope with the note inside. I stood there for a long time, looking at it all like a soldier inspecting his armor before battle. I wanted to believe this was a new beginning. I wanted to believe Connor had finally come around, that the years of silence had worn away whatever anger had driven us apart. I wanted to believe the invitation was genuine. But as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, Catherine's words echoed in my head. "Be careful, Thomas." I should have listened. Silverstone Hall stood at the corner of 8th and Oak, its limestone facade glowing under the streetlights. Through the tall glass doors, I could see the interior ablaze with light crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, white roses spilling from centerpieces on every table. A string quartet tucked into the far corner, playing something soft and elegant. Catherine stood beside me on the sidewalk, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "Last chance to turn around," she said quietly. I shook my head. I came this far. We climbed the steps together and pushed through the doors into a world that felt like it belonged to someone else. The air was warm and perfumed laughter and conversation rising and falling in waves. 65 guests in formal attire, champagne flutes glittering in their hands, mingling beneath the chandeliers, like characters in a movie I had not been invited to watch. At the entrance, a young woman in a black dress stood behind a podium, a guest list spread out before her. She looked up as I approached, her smile professional and bright. "That name, please?" "Thomas Blackwood." She scanned the list, her finger tracing down the rows of names. "Ah, yes, table 12. I glanced at the seating chart posted on an easel beside her. Table 12 was tucked into the far corner of the room, just past the swinging kitchen doors. The farthest table from the head table. The farthest table from anywhere that mattered. Catherine leaned in close. "Table 12. Thomas, this is—" "It's fine," I said, though my voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. "At least I'm here." I made my way through the crowd, weaving between clusters of guests who did not know me, did not see me. Near the front of the room, I spotted Connor standing beside Melissa, both of them dressed impeccably, Connor in a charcoal suit, Melissa in a champagne-colored gown that caught the light with every movement. I walked toward them, the gift boxes tucked under my arm, my rehearsed words waiting on my tongue. "Connor!" He turned, and for a moment his face went blank. Then something flickered across his expression. Recognition followed by something harder to name. Discomfort, maybe. Or resentment. "Dad, you made it." "Of course I made it." I held out the boxes, their silver wrapping and white ribbons still perfect. "Congratulations, to both of you." Connor took them without meeting my eyes. "Thanks. I'll open these later. Maybe we could talk for a bit after the speeches, or I need to greet the other guests," he said, cutting me off. "Sorry." He turned and walked away, Melissa following a step behind. Neither of them looked back. I stood there for a moment, the noise of the party swirling around me like water around a stone. Then I made my way to table 12. Catherine was already seated, her expression tight. 5 other people occupied the remaining chairs, strangers, all of them chatting easily about topics that had nothing to do with me. I took the seat beside Catherine and tried to settle into the uncomfortable reality of being invisible. One of the men across the table glanced at me, curious. "So, how do you know Connor?" "I'm his father." The man blinked, surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize, I thought—" Catherine interrupted smoothly. "He's been very busy." The conversation moved on, but I barely heard it. My attention was fixed on the head table at the front of the room, where Connor and Melissa sat, flanked by Angela, Daniel, Rowan, Logan, and Isabella. Angela looked radiant in a deep blue dress, laughing at something Daniel said. Daniel himself leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. Logan and Isabella sat on either side of their grandmother, oblivious to my presence in the far corner. At table 3, closer to the front, but still not in the inner circle, Preston Montgomery sat with a group of people I assumed were Connor's co-workers. He caught my eye and smiled a thin, knowing smile that made my stomach tighten. I looked around the room, taking in the details I had tried not to notice. The venue alone must have cost $10,000 or $12,000. The flowers, the catering, the champagne, the quartet, it all added up. 35,000, maybe 40. Melissa's voice drifted across the room as she laughed with a guest loud enough for half the hall to hear. We wanted everything to be perfect. This place cost a fortune, but it was worth it. I thought about the numbers I had been carrying in my head for years. $148,000 for the house down payment, $52,000 for the failed startup, $11,700 for the gifts I had brought tonight. And in return, I was seated at table 12 next to the kitchen with strangers who did not know my name. Catherine leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. By 7:15, the main course had been served and cleared. The quartet stopped playing, and the hum of conversation began to quiet. A man in a tuxedo. The MC, I assumed, stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room and tapped it lightly. "Good evening, everyone. We're about to begin the speeches. First, we'll hear from Melissa, then Angela, followed by Daniel, and finally our guest of honor, Connor." I scanned the list in my head, waiting for my name. It did not come. Catherine's grip tightened on my wrist. "Thomas, why aren't you speaking?" I wasn't asked. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Melissa stood and made her way to the microphone, her gown shimmering under the lights. She spoke for 5 minutes, gracious, charming, thanking the guests for coming, thanking her parents for their love. And then near the end, she said the words that hit me like a slap. "I also want to thank Angela for all her support over the years. And Daniel, who has been like a second father to Connor. We're so lucky to have you both." A second father. The phrase hung in the air impossibly heavy. I felt Catherine's hand on mine, grounding me before I could react. "Stay calm," she whispered. I nodded, though I was not sure I believed myself capable of it. Melissa returned to her seat, and the applause rippled through the room. The MC gestured to the head table. "And now Angela Rowan." Angela stood slowly smoothing the fabric of her dress with deliberate care. She walked to the microphone with the poise of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. And then just before she spoke, she turned her head and looked directly at me. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had won a game I had not known I was playing. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice warm and steady. "I want to talk to you about freedom. I had heard cruel words before. In business negotiations that turned ugly, in the divorce proceedings with Angela when lawyers said things designed to wound. But I had never heard them from my own son, not like this, not in front of 65 people who laughed as if it were entertainment. Angela let the word hang in the air, freedom allowing it to settle over the room like a benediction. Then she continued, her voice smooth and practiced. 42 years ago, I made a choice to marry a man I believed would bring me happiness. But over time, I realized I was living someone else's life. I was trapped in expectations that were never mine. 4 years ago, I found the courage to leave, to find Daniel, and to rediscover who I was meant to be. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience before landing briefly on me. "Connor, I am so proud that you have chosen your own path, that you refuse to let anyone control you." Applause rippled through the room. Angela returned to her seat and Daniel squeezed her hand. Then Daniel himself stood and walked to the microphone. He was younger than me, by nearly 20 years, his hair still dark, his posture straight and confident. He spoke with the ease of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "Connor, you're like a son to me. Over these past 4 years, I've watched you grow into the man you were always meant to be. I've seen you break free from unfair expectations." He did not say my name. He did not have to. "And I'm honored to be part of your life." More applause, more smiles. At table 3, Preston Montgomery rose halfway from his seat, lifting his champagne glass high. "Connor, you're the best employee I've ever had. Here's to your future." He drank, then turned his head just slightly enough to catch my eye. His smile was thin and sharp, the smile of a man who had waited 25 years for revenge. I sat frozen at table 12, Catherine's hand, a quiet anchor on my arm. Around us, the strangers at our table clapped politely, oblivious to the undercurrent swirling through the room. And then Connor stood. He adjusted his tie as he walked to the microphone, his expression calm, almost serene. Melissa watched him from the head table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Angela leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. Connor cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Melissa and I are so grateful. And I want to thank my mother, who has always supported me even when it was hard, who taught me that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you." The room murmured in agreement. I also want to thank Daniel, who has been the father figure I needed, who showed me what it means to be respected, not controlled. Catherine's grip on my arm tightened. Connor's gaze swept across the room, and then slowly, deliberately, it settled on the table 12. On me. His voice changed. Not louder, but sharper, colder. Everyone, let's give a round of applause to my mother's awakening. Congratulations to the woman who successfully kicked out the most rotten and disgusting debt she ever had. The man standing right here, the man I once had to call father. The silence lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for the words to land, to sink in, to burrow beneath skin and bone. Then someone laughed. A nervous, uncertain sound at first. But it spread rippling through Connor's friends, through Angela's circle, through the guests who did not know me, and saw only a punchline in formal wear. Preston Montgomery clapped loudly, his hands echoing across the hall. Angela smiled, her expression triumphant. Daniel raised his glass again. At the head table, Logan and Isabella looked confused, their young faces creased with uncertainty. Melissa stared down at her hands, and I sat there motionless as the laughter washed over me, like a wave I could not stop. It was not pain I felt, not the sharp, sudden sting of a slap. It was something deeper, an emptiness vast and total, as if everything I had ever believed about my life had been scooped out and discarded. I looked at Connor standing at the microphone with his head held high, and I did not recognize him. The boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for, gone, replaced by a stranger who spoke my name like a curse. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket. Catherine noticed. "Thomas, what are you doing?" I did not answer. My thumb moved slowly, deliberately across the screen. First tap. I opened the banking app, the familiar interface loading in seconds. Second tap. I selected the trust fund account. Connor Blackwood, beneficiary. Balance $500,000. Third tap. Transfer all funds to Thomas Blackwood personal account. The confirmation screen appeared. I pressed accept. A notification blinked at the top of the screen. Transfer successful. $500,000 moved to Thomas Blackwood personal account. At the head table, Melissa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. She leaned over and whispered urgently to Connor, showing him the notification. Connor's expression shifted confusion, then shock, then something close to panic. He looked out into the crowd, searching for me. I stood. The room fell quiet, the laughter dying as quickly as it had started. Every pair of eyes turned toward table 12, toward the man in the charcoal suit, rising from the corner near the kitchen. I looked at Connor, held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Then I spoke, my voice calm and clear. "Enjoy the party, Connor." I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the hall erupted, voices rising sharp and frantic. Someone shouted. Melissa called Connor's name, but I did not look back. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, past the chandeliers and the roses and the champagne flutes glittering under the lights. The glass doors swung open and I stepped out into the cool night air. The sounds of the party faded behind me, muffled by distance and stone. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. Footsteps behind me, Catherine hurrying to catch up. "Thomas, are you okay?" I turned to look at her, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sad one, just a smile. "I'm fine," I said. For the first time in a long time, I'm actually fine. The streetlights slid past in a steady rhythm as I drove home, Catherine silent in the passenger seat. The city looked different somehow, softer around the edges, as if the world had adjusted its focus while I was not looking. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road, and let the quiet settle between us. Freedom, that was what I felt. Not anger, not regret, just freedom. Like a weight I had carried on my shoulders for 40 years had finally been lifted, and I could stand upright again. Catherine broke the silence as we pulled onto my street. "Are you sure about this, Thomas?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She nodded, and we did not speak again until I parked in the driveway. Inside, I turned on the lights, and the house came alive around me. It felt different. Lighter. As if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for years, and now at last they could exhale. Catherine set her purse on the kitchen counter. "I'm staying tonight." "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm staying anyway." We made tea and sat in the living room, not talking much, just existing in the same space. For the first time in 4 years since the divorce papers had been signed and Angela had walked out with Daniel Rowan at her side, I felt at peace. Not happy exactly, but whole. Like I had reclaimed a piece of myself I had not realized was missing. Catherine left her mug half-finished and headed upstairs to the guest room. I stayed on the couch a while longer, staring at the dark television screen before finally turning in myself. 8 o'clock the next morning, I woke to the sound of buzzing. At first I thought it was a wasp trapped somewhere in the room. Then I realized it was my phone vibrating continuously on the nightstand. I picked it up and stared at the screen. 42 missed calls. I scrolled through the list slowly, each name a small jolt. Connor 18 times, Melissa 12, Angela 8, Daniel twice. 2 calls from numbers I did not recognize. Below that, 67 text messages. I opened the thread from Connor first. The messages came in waves starting around midnight and continuing until 7:30 this morning. That's, "Dad, what the hell did you do? That money was mine. You had no right. Call me back now. You're going to regret this. I can't believe you'd stoop this low." Melissa's messages were more restrained but no less desperate. "Thomas, please, we need that money. Connor has debts. You don't understand. Can we talk, just the two of us? Please respond." Angela's texts were the angriest. "You selfish bastard. That money was for your son's future. All you've ever cared about is control. Grow up, Thomas." I set the phone down and went downstairs. Catherine was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, the smell rich and grounding. She looked up when I entered. "How bad is it?" 42 calls, 67 messages. She winced. "Are you going to respond?" "No." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good." My phone rang again. This time it was Ava. I answered. "Hey, Dad, what happened?" I told her. All of it. The party, the speeches, Connor's words, the 3 taps that transferred $500,000 back into my name. Ava was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He really said that in front of everyone?" "Yes." "Dad, I'm so sorry." "Don't be, I'm not." "Are you sure? Because if you need me to come home, I can get a flight tonight." "I'm sure, sweetheart, but thank you." After we hung up, Catherine poured me a cup of coffee and we sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the morning sun spilled across the lawn, bright and unforgiving. It felt like the start of something. Not an ending, a beginning. 4 days later, on March 27th, a courier arrived at my door with a manila envelope. I signed for it and carried it inside, already knowing what it was. I opened it slowly, unfolding the legal documents with careful hands. Connor Blackwood, plaintiff versus Thomas Blackwood, defendant. The lawsuit was 23 pages long. I skimmed the opening paragraphs, the legal jargon dense and formal, before landing on the key sections. Claim for relief, $500,000 in unlawfully appropriated assets, $100,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. Total $600,000. The allegations were laid out in cold clinical language: unlawful appropriation of assets, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I read it twice, then set it on the table. Catherine arrived an hour later. I handed her the documents without a word. She read them standing in the kitchen, her expression hardening with each page. $600,000, she said finally. He's not asking for the trust fund back. He's asking for more. I noticed. Thomas, you need a lawyer, a good one. I know. I have someone in mind, Douglas Freeman. He's the best litigation attorney in the state. Retired from corporate law a few years ago, but he still takes cases that interest him. Will this interest him? Catherine smiled grimly. Oh, I think so. That evening, my phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, "From Connor." I opened it. "Dad, you were never really a father. You were just a wallet, a checkbook I could tap whenever I needed something. And now that I don't need you anymore, you pull this stunt. You've shown your true colors: cold, controlling, petty. I hope you're happy with yourself. Connor." I read it once, then closed the email and set the phone aside. Catherine was watching me from the doorway. What did he say? Nothing I didn't already know. A week after the party, I sat in the office of Douglas Freeman. The space was understated but expensive dark wood furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a single-frame diploma from Harvard Law on the wall. Freeman himself was in his early 60s, silver-haired with sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He read Connor's lawsuit in silence, flipping through the pages methodically. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. "Mr. Blackwood, your son, is suing you for $600,000. I know, but I don't think we should just play defense." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I think we can do better than that. I think we can win." Douglas Freeman was known for two things: winning cases no one thought he could win, and never taking a client he did not believe in. When he agreed to represent me, I knew I had a chance. His office occupied the 12th floor of a glass tower downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. Behind a heavy oak desk sat rows of legal volumes, their spines worn from decades of use. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Douglas himself, 62 years old, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a sharp gaze, sat across from me, with his hands folded on the desk, listening intently to every word I said. Catherine sat beside me with her notebook open. She had made the introduction a week earlier, after Connor filed his lawsuit demanding $600,000. Now, 1 week after the devastating party, we were here to fight back with everything we had. Douglas tapped the lawsuit papers in front of him and asked me to tell him exactly what happened. I took a deep breath and began recounting the entire story, starting with the divorce 4 years ago, when Angela left with Daniel Rowan, a man 15 years her junior, and Connor cut all contact with me. I described 3 years of painful silence, then the unexpected invitation to his 12th wedding anniversary party. I told Douglas about the humiliating seating arrangement at table 12 in the far corner by the kitchen and the speeches that followed. I recounted Angela's monologue about freedom, Daniel being called a second father, Preston Montgomery's toast, and finally Connor at the microphone standing in front of 65 witnesses, publicly destroying me with his cruel words. When I finished, Douglas remained quiet for a long moment, absorbing everything. Then he leaned forward and asked if I had any evidence of what Connor said at the party. I told him yes, that a guest had recorded it, capturing 30 seconds of video. He asked to see it immediately. I pulled out my phone and opened the file Catherine had sent me the morning after the party, then handed it across the desk. Douglas pressed play, his face completely impassive as he watched. The audio was clear, the video shaky but serviceable. He watched in silence, then set the phone down carefully. He looked at me with an intensity I had not seen before and said quietly that this was damning evidence that, with this recording, we had proof of extreme ingratitude. I asked if we could really use this in court, hardly daring to hope. Douglas reached behind him and pulled a thick legal code from the shelf. He flipped to a marked section and turned it so I could see, telling me absolutely that what Connor did was not just morally wrong, but legally actionable. He explained that there was a legal doctrine called revocation of gifts due to gross ingratitude recognized in most states, including ours, rooted in common law and upheld in numerous court cases. I stared at him, barely comprehending, and he continued explaining that the law stated, if you give someone a gift, whether money, property, or support, and they respond with extreme disrespect, cruelty, or harm toward you, you have the legal right to revoke those gifts or seek restitution. I protested that I had already given him the money over 40 years, but Douglas nodded knowingly and said that was where the law made important distinctions. First, the trust fund that I had established and funded remained in my name, making it what lawyers call an expectant gift, meaning Connor had an expectation of receiving it, but no vested legal right until I formally transferred ownership. Since I withdrew it before that transfer occurred, I was legally within my rights. Second, regarding the money I spent on his education, housing, and business ventures, those were completed gifts. But under the doctrine of gross ingratitude, we could argue for partial restitution, asking Connor to pay back a portion of what I gave him as a consequence of his ingratitude. I asked what exactly counted as gross ingratitude, and Douglas set the book down to meet my gaze directly. He explained that the bar was high, that it was not just rudeness or a family argument, but had to be conduct so egregious that it shocked the conscience involving public humiliation, severe disrespect, and acts that fundamentally violated the relationship between donor and recipient. He gestured toward my phone and said that publicly calling your father the most rotten and disgusting debt in front of 65 witnesses at a celebration captured on video was textbook gross ingratitude. I felt something loosen in my chest when he confirmed we had a very strong case, a weight I had carried since the party, maybe even longer, finally beginning to lift. For the first time in a week, I felt something close to hope returning to my weary soul. Douglas opened his laptop and asked me to estimate how much I had invested in Connor over the course of his life, including education, housing, and support. I had kept meticulous records and recited the numbers from memory while he typed them into a column on the screen. College tuition was $92,000. His MBA was $31,000. The down payment on his house was $148,000. I invested $52,000 in a business that failed $32,000, for a car about $11,700 for his wedding. Around $26,000 helping with childcare costs for Logan and Isabella and other support over the years, including emergency loans repairs and vacations totaling maybe another $32,000. Douglas paused scrolling through the comprehensive list, then turned the screen toward me. At the bottom, in bold letters, was a single figure that took my breath away: $925,000. I stared at it in disbelief. I had known the number was substantial, but seeing it written out like that, cold and precise, made it real in a way it had never been before. Douglas added quietly that, plus the trust fund of $500,000, I had given Connor over $1 million. 3 days later, Douglas filed the counterclaim, and the papers would be served within the week. When Connor received them, he would realize something profound: I was not backing down. And for the first time in his life, I was fighting back with the law on my side. Catherine's home office had become a war room. 3 weeks after the party, the small second-floor study was covered in printouts, sticky notes, and photographs spread across every available surface. Legal documents from 1999, employment records, bank statements. A timeline she had constructed on the poster board with red string connecting names and dates like a detective in a crime thriller. She sat at her desk with her phone pressed to her ear, listening to Gary Morrison's voice crackle through the speaker. Outside the window, the April afternoon was bright and warm, but inside the air felt dense with something darker. "Catherine, I found him," Gary said. "Marcus Reed. He worked with Connor at Montgomery and Associates for about a year, left 6 months ago. He's willing to talk." Catherine, like a detective who never gave up. For 3 weeks she had been digging, interviewing, checking records. And when she called me that evening, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury. "Thomas," she said, "I found it. I found all of it." 2 days later, Catherine met Marcus Reed at a coffee shop downtown. The place was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull, just a barista wiping down the espresso machine and a college student typing on a laptop in the corner. Marcus was younger than I had expected, early 30s, with thinning hair and a nervous energy that made him fidget with his coffee cup. Catherine had asked me to come along, but I stayed in the car. She thought Marcus would be more comfortable talking to her alone, without the father of the man caught in the middle, sitting across the table. She recorded the conversation on her phone. That night she played it for me in my living room, the audio tinny but clear. "So you worked with Connor," Catherine said on the recording. "Yeah, for about a year. He was nice enough, I guess, but something was off." "Off how?" Marcus paused. "Preston Montgomery, our boss. He had this thing about Connor. He'd pull him into his office every Friday afternoon. Private meetings, just the two of them. It wasn't normal. The rest of us noticed." "What did they talk about?" "I don't know for sure. But one time I was walking past Preston's office and the door was cracked open. I heard Preston say, 'Your father took everything from me. Do you understand that everything?' Oh, and Connor just sat there listening." Catherine's voice on the recording was calm, controlled. "Did Preston ever mention Thomas Blackwood by name?" "All the time. He called him a liar, a fraud. said he destroyed Preston's career back in the 90s, testified in some lawsuit that cost Preston over $1 million. Preston said he almost went bankrupt because of it. Did Connor believe him? Marcus hesitated. I think so. Preston was good at it. He'd frame it like he was helping Connor, enlightening him about his father, telling him he deserved better. After a few months, Connor started repeating the same stuff, talking about how his dad was controlling, manipulative. It was like Preston had planted the words in his head, and they just kept growing. Did you ever hear Preston say anything explicit about wanting to hurt Thomas Blackwood? Spekor, was final. Once, it was after work at a company happy hour. Preston had a few drinks and he got sloppy. He looked at Connor and said, "Your father destroyed me. I'll never forgive that. But maybe you can help me, even the score." Connor just laughed like it was a joke. But I don't think Preston was joking. The recording ended. Catherine stopped the playback and looked at me. "Marcus is willing to testify," she said. "If it goes to trial, he'll go on record." I sat back on the couch, the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical thing. Preston Montgomery, a man I had barely thought about in 25 years. A man I had testified against because the evidence was clear, because the law demanded it, because it was the right thing to do. And he had spent 2 years poisoning my son against me. "Connor didn't come up with those words on his own," Catherine said quietly. "The speech at the party, calling you a debt, saying you were controlling, that wasn't Connor, that was Preston." "But Connor said them," I replied. "Connor stood at that microphone and chose to say them, in front of 65 people. Catherine nodded. "I know, and that's the part I can't figure out. How much of this is Preston's doing, and how much is Connor's choice?" 3 days later, Catherine brought me the full report. We sat at my kitchen table as she walked me through it, her notes organized into a thick folder with tabs and highlighted sections. 1999, she said, flipping to the first section. Preston Montgomery was sued by a construction firm for fraud and falsified permits. You were called as an expert witness. Your testimony was damning. The jury awarded the plaintiff $1.2 million in damages. Preston nearly went bankrupt. He lost clients. His reputation was shredded. "I remember," I said, "but I was just doing my job. I told the court what I saw." "I know, but Preston didn't see it that way. He saw you as the person who destroyed his life." She flipped to the next section. Fast forward to 2022. Preston hires Connor, bypasses the usual hiring process, brings him on directly even though there were 3 better qualified candidates. Why Connor? Because Connor is your son. Because Preston saw an opportunity. She tapped the page. Gary talked to another former employee. She said Preston used to talk about you all the time. He was obsessed. And when Connor applied for the job, Preston practically celebrated. He told the HR director, "This is perfect. I want him." Not because Connor was talented, because Connor was yours. I stared at the report, the timeline laid out in neat rows, every piece of evidence pointing to the same conclusion. Revenge. This was all about revenge. Catherine leaned forward. "Thomas Connor is a victim here. Preston manipulated him, groomed him basically. Spent 2 years filling his head with lies and half-truths. By the time the party rolled around, Connor probably believed every word he said." "Maybe," I said. "But he still said them. He still chose Angela and Daniel over me. He still stood at that microphone and called me rotten." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're right, he did." That night I sat alone at the kitchen table. Catherine's report spread out in front of me. Preston Montgomery. A name I had buried in the past. A ghost I thought had moved on. But he had not moved on. He had waited, planned. And when the opportunity came, he had taken my son and turned him into a weapon. Connor was a victim. Catherine was right about that. But Connor was also a willing accomplice. He had believed the lies because he wanted to. He had chosen to hurt me because it was easier than choosing the hard, uncomfortable work of reconciliation. And I did not know which hurt more, the betrayal or the realization that my son had never really known me at all. 3 weeks after Catherine uncovered Preston's conspiracy, the letter arrived. A plain white envelope, formal and impersonal. The return address read, Internal Revenue Service. It was addressed to Connor Blackwood, but somehow Catherine had obtained a copy, and what she found changed everything. She called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice tight with urgency. "Thomas, you need to come over, now." I drove to her house, my mind cycling through possibilities. Another witness, more evidence of Preston's manipulation. I parked in her driveway and found her waiting at the door, a manila folder clutched in her hand. Inside, she spread the documents across her kitchen table. At the center was a photocopy of the IRS letter, stamped with an official seal and dated April 23rd. "Notice of audit," Catherine said, tapping the heading. "Connor's been flagged. They're investigating his tax returns for the past 3 years." I picked up the letter and scanned it. The language was dense and formal, but the message was clear. The IRS had identified discrepancies in Connor's reported business expenses. They were opening a full audit requesting documentation and warning of potential penalties. "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked. Catherine flipped to another page, a breakdown compiled by Gary Morrison, who had somehow managed to pull Connor's filings through a contact at an accounting firm. Connor claimed a startup business loss of $190,000 over 3 years. He deducted it from his taxable income, which lowered what he owed significantly. "Okay, so he had a failed startup. We already knew that." "Thomas, the startup doesn't exist." She pointed to a line on the report. Gary checked. There's no business license, no tax identification number, no incorporation papers. Connor made it up. He fabricated the entire thing to reduce his tax liability. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He lied to the IRS. Yes, and there's more. She pulled out another sheet, printed receipts and travel itineraries. Connor also claimed business travel expenses, a trip to Hawaii with Melissa, another to Europe. He wrote them off as work-related, but according to his former colleague at Montgomery and Associates, Connor never traveled for business. These were vacations. I sat down slowly, the weight of it pressing against me. My son was not just desperate, he was a criminal. "How much trouble is he in?" I asked. "A lot. Tax fraud is a federal crime. If the IRS can prove intentional deception, and they can based on this, Connor could face penalties up to 50% of the unpaid taxes. That's about $95,000 plus interest. And if they decide to pursue criminal charges..." She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Prison. I stared at the documents spread across the table, the cold black and white evidence of my son's choices. He had lied, cheated, broken the law, and now he was facing consequences he could not talk or manipulate his way out of. Catherine watched me carefully. "Thomas, I know this is hard, but it actually helps your case." "How?" "Because it proves Connor's character. It shows he's dishonest, willing to break the law for financial gain. Douglas can use this at trial. It strengthens your argument that Connor doesn't deserve the trust fund or anything else from you." That afternoon, I drove to Douglas Freeman's office. He read through the IRS report with the methodical focus of a man who had seen every kind of human failure. When he finished, he set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. "Your son is in serious trouble, Mr. Blackwood." "I know." "The IRS doesn't mess around with tax fraud. If they have opened an audit, they already have enough to move forward. Connor's looking at penalties back, taxes, possibly criminal prosecution." He paused. "And it gives us leverage." Catherine said the same thing. "She's right. This shows a pattern of dishonesty. When we go to trial, we can argue that Connor's lawsuit is just another attempt to manipulate you for money. The judge will see that." Douglas tapped the report. "This is good for us, but I imagine it's not easy for you." It was not. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Just a deep, aching sadness. My son, who I had raised, educated, supported for 40 years, had become someone I did not recognize. A liar. A cheat. A man so desperate he would risk everything for money he had not earned. "Do you think he knows yet?" I asked. "About the audit?" "If he received this letter 3 weeks ago, he knows, and I'd bet he's panicking." Douglas was right. 3 days later, an email arrived. The subject line read, "Dad, please." I opened it. Dad, I know things have been bad between us. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. I really am. But I need your help. The IRS is auditing me. I made some mistakes with my taxes. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to keep my head above water. The penalties are going to be huge. I can't afford them. If you drop the lawsuit and give me back the trust fund, I can pay what I owe and get my life back on track. Please, Dad. Logan and Isabella need me. Don't let them see their father go to prison. I'm begging you. I read it twice. Then I closed the email and set my phone aside. Catherine called an hour later. Did you see it? Yes. Are you going to respond? No. Good. Because that's not an apology, Thomas. That's a negotiation. He's not sorry for what he did to you. He's sorry he got caught. And he's using your grandchildren as leverage. I know. Well, so what do you do now? Nothing. I wait. 2 weeks passed. The weather turned warm spring settling into the valley with bright afternoons and cool evenings. I worked in my garden, met with Douglas to prepare for the lawsuit, and tried to ignore the silence from Connor's end. Then on a Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I set down the book I had been reading and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 small figures standing on the porch. I opened the door. Logan and Isabella stood there, each holding a small suitcase. Logan was 13 now, taller than I remembered his face, uncertain. Isabella was 10, her eyes red from crying. Behind them, parked in the driveway, Connor's car idled. As I watched it, backed out and drove away. Logan looked up at me, his voice small. Grandpa, I stared after the car, my chest tightening. Connor had done it. He had played his final card. He had weaponized his own children, left them on my doorstep, like a message I could not ignore. And for the first time since the party, I felt something other than resolve. I felt afraid. 6 weeks after the party, I sat in the waiting room of Dr. Evelyn Morrison's office, a clipboard balanced on my knee. Connor had filed a motion with the court requesting that I be declared legally incompetent. The petition claimed I was unstable, irrational, and incapable of managing my own financial affairs. This evaluation would determine whether his allegations had any merit. Spoiler, they did not. But before I explain how I got here, I need to go back a week, because the story does not begin in Dr. Morrison's office. It begins with a phone call from Douglas Freeman, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Thomas Connor just filed another motion. I had been in my kitchen washing dishes left over from breakfast. I set down the sponge and leaned against the counter. What kind of motion? He's asking the court to declare you incompetent. He wants a conservatorship, legal guardianship over your assets and decision-making. The words hung in the air, absurd and insulting in equal measure. He claims your decision to transfer the trust fund was evidence of mental instability, that you're not of sound mind, that you need someone, specifically him, to manage your affairs. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was throwing the phone across the room. Douglas, I'm 67 years old. I ran a successful architecture firm for 30 years. I manage my own finances. I'm in perfect health. On what grounds could he possibly... Desperation, Douglas interrupted. He's drowning Thomas. The IRS is closing in. His debts are piling up. And he sees that $500,000 sitting in your account of money he thought was his, and he'll do anything to get it. Even this. Will the court take it seriously? They have to. It's a formal petition. The judge will order a psychiatric evaluation. You'll need to undergo cognitive testing and interview the whole process. But, Thomas, I've seen your financials. I've talked to you for hours. You're one of the most mentally sharp people I know. This is a Hail Mary on Connor's part, and it's going to fail. When is the evaluation? Next week, I'll send you the details. 7 days later, I walked into Dr. Evelyn Morrison's office. The space was calm and professional. Pale blue walls, a bookshelf lined with psychiatric texts, a desk with a framed photo of what I assume was her family. Doctor. Morrison herself was in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a low bun, and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she had heard every lie and excuse imaginable. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming. I understand this is an unusual situation. Now that's one way to put it. She smiled faintly. I've reviewed the petition filed by your son. He alleges that your recent financial decisions, specifically the transfer of a $500,000 trust fund, indicate impaired judgment. My job today is to assess your cognitive function and determine whether those allegations have merit. Does that make sense? Yes. Good. We'll start with a standard cognitive assessment, the mini mental state examination. It tests orientation, memory, attention, and language. Then we'll talk about your decision-making process. Sound fair? Sounds fair. She pulled out a printed form and a pen. Let's begin. Can you tell me today's date? May 7th, 2024. What day of the week is it? Tuesday. Where are we right now? Your office, on the 3rd floor of the Riverside Medical Building. She made notes as I answered. The questions continued naming objects, repeating phrases, performing simple calculations, recalling a list of words she had asked me to remember earlier. I answered each one clearly, my mind sharp and focused. Finally, she set down her pen. 29 out of 30. That's an excellent score, Mr. Blackwood. Well, within the normal range for your age group. What did I miss? A single word on the recall test. Most people miss at least one. It's not concerning. She leaned back in her chair. Now, let's talk about the trust fund. Walk me through your decision to transfer it. I took a breath and laid it out. The party, the speeches, Connor's public humiliation, the laughter, the realization that the son I had spent 40 years supporting viewed me as nothing more than a source of money. I transferred the fund to protect myself, I said, not out of anger, not impulsively, but because I recognized a pattern of behavior that would not stop. Connor was not going to reconcile with me. He was going to take everything he could and then walk away. So I made a choice, a deliberate, rational choice, to prioritize my own well-being for once. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. And how do you feel about that decision now? Do you regret it? No, I don't. Do you feel it was made in a moment of emotional distress? I was hurt. Of course I was. But the decision itself was not emotional. It was practical. I had the legal right to transfer that money, and I exercised it. She made a final note, then closed the folder. Mr. Blackwood, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory, reasoning, and judgment are all intact. You made a difficult decision under difficult circumstances, but that does not indicate incompetence. If anything, it indicates exactly the opposite. 2 days later, Douglas called with the news. The court received Dr. Morrison's report. They're denying Connor's motion. No conservatorship, no guardianship. You're in the clear. I exhaled a tension I had not realized I was carrying, releasing from my shoulders. Did Connor respond? He left the courthouse before the judge finished reading the decision. According to the clerk, he looked unhinged. That evening, Douglas called again. His tone was different this time, cautious, almost apologetic. Thomas Connor's losing control. He lost the competency case. The IRS is tightening the screws, and his lawyer just sent me a message. He's planning something with Logan and Isabella. My chest tightened. What do you mean? He thinks if he can get you emotionally involved with the kids, you'll feel guilty enough to give him the money. He's going to use them as leverage. Drop them at your house, make you feel responsible for them, and then come back demanding the trust fund in exchange for taking them back. I closed my eyes. When? Could be any day now. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But, Thomas, you need to be ready. Because when those kids show up, you're going to have to decide how to handle it. I hung up the phone and stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street. The pieces were falling into place. Connor had lost the legal battle, lost the competency challenge. And now, desperate and cornered, he was turning to the one weapon he thought I could not resist. My grandchildren. 5 weeks after the party, the doorbell rang at 7 in the morning. I was in the kitchen pouring my first cup of coffee when the sound cut through the quiet house. I set down the pot and walked to the front door, a sense of inevitability settling over me like a weight. I opened the door. Logan and Isabella stood on the porch, each holding a small suitcase. Logan was 13 now, taller than I remembered his face, carefully blank. Isabella was 10, her eyes red-rimmed and uncertain. Behind them, parked in the driveway, Connor's car idled with the engine running. I looked past the children and met Connor's gaze through the windshield. He did not get out, did not roll down the window, just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching. I knew immediately this was his next move. "Grandpa," Logan's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. I crouched down so I was eye level with Isabella. "Hey, sweetheart, what's going on?" "Dad said that we're staying with you for a while," she said, her voice trembling. He said he can't. He said things are hard right now." I looked back at the car. Connor still had not moved. Coward. "Come inside," I said, taking Isabella's suitcase. "Let's get you settled." As I led them into the house, I heard the car pull away. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the sound of tires on asphalt fading into the distance. I closed the door and set the suitcases in the hallway. Logan stood stiffly, his arms crossed, while Isabella hovered near the stairs, looking around the house as if she were visiting a stranger. "Are you too hungry?" I asked. Logan shrugged. Isabella nodded. "All right, pancakes sound good." For the first time, Isabella's face brightened. "With chocolate chips?" "If I have them, let's check." In the kitchen, I found a half-empty bag of chocolate chips in the pantry and set to work. Logan sat at the table silent, while Isabella wandered around the room, touching things: the fruit bowl, the coffee maker, a framed photo of me and Catherine from years ago. "Where's Dad going?" she asked. "I don't know, sweetheart." "Is he coming back?" "Eventually." Logan's voice cut in sharp and bitter. "He dumped us here because he's broke. That's what Mom said." I glanced at him. "Your mom said that?" "Yeah, last night. She was crying. Said Dad made bad choices, and now they can't afford to keep us." He looked down at his hands. "She said we were a burden." The words landed like stones. I turned off the stove and sat down across from Logan, leaving the pancakes half-cooked on the griddle. "You are not a burden," I said firmly. "Do you hear me? You're kids. You didn't choose any of this." Logan's jaw tightened, but he did not look up. Isabella climbed into the chair beside me. "Grandpa, are you mad at Dad?" I chose my words carefully. "Your dad and I are working through some things, but that has nothing to do with you two. You're always welcome here. Always." Over the next few days, a routine emerged. I cooked meals. We watched movies in the living room. Isabella helped me in the garden, planting tomatoes and pulling weeds. Logan stayed quiet, spending most of his time in the guest room with his phone, but slowly he began to come downstairs more often. One evening, about a week after they arrived, Logan found me on the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He sat down on the steps beside me, his hands clasped between his knees. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What Dad said at the party about you being a debt, was that true?" I exhaled slowly. "No, it wasn't." "Then why did he say it?" "I don't know, Logan. I wish I did." He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I didn't laugh at the party. Everyone else did, but I didn't." I looked at him, this boy who was caught between childhood and something harder, and felt my chest tighten. "I know," I said. "I saw you." I wanted to say something, to tell them to stop, but I didn't know how. I put my hand on his shoulder. "You were in an impossible situation. You don't owe me an apology, but I should have." "Logan." I waited until he looked at me. "You're 13 years old. You're not responsible for your father's choices, or mine. What happened at that party was between me and him, not you." He nodded, though I was not sure he believed me. That night, after the kids were asleep, I called Catherine. "How are they?" she asked. It's scared, confused. Logan's angry. Isabella's trying to hold it together. "And you?" "I'm fine. They're good kids, Catherine. They don't deserve this." "No, they don't. But, Thomas, you need to be careful. Connor's using them. You know that, right?" "I know." "He's going to come back and demand money in exchange for taking them off your hands. That's the play." "Let him try." 2 days later, Connor called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later. This time, I answered. "What do you want, Connor?" "I want to talk about the kids." "They're fine." "Dad, I can't afford to take care of them right now. You know that. I'm drowning in debt. The IRS is..." That's not my problem. It could be. If you gave me back the trust fund. No. Dad, please. I'll drop the lawsuit. I'll leave you alone. Just give me the money and take the kids permanently. You love them. I know you do. This could work for everyone. I closed my eyes, anger rising like bile in my throat. You want me to buy your children, Connor? Silence. That's what you're asking. You want me to pay you $500,000 to raise the kids you abandoned. I didn't abandon them. I'm giving them to someone who can provide for them. You dumped them on my doorstep and drove away without saying goodbye. That's abandonment. I took a breath, steadying myself. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take care of Logan and Isabella. I'm going to feed them, house them, and make sure they're safe. Not because of you, not because you asked, but because they're innocent in all of this. And when you're ready to be a father again, if you ever are, we'll talk. But you're not getting a dime from me. Not now. Not ever. I hung up before he could respond. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the county courthouse, adjusting my tie in the reflection of a car window. Catherine was beside me, her expression grim. Douglas Freeman carried a thick folder of evidence bank statements, tax records, witness testimony. Logan and Isabella were at summer camp, far away from the ugliness that was about to unfold. Inside, we would sit across from Connor, his lawyer Roland Pierce, and Melissa in a mediation room. This was the last chance to settle before trial, but I already knew there would be no settlement, not on Connor's terms, not ever again. 11 weeks after the party, I sat in a conference room with Douglas Freeman. The walls were beige, the air conditioning hummed. Across from us sat Connor, Roland Pierce, and Melissa. Between us, a mediator, a stack of legal documents, and 3 months of anger, betrayal, and pain. This was mediation, our last chance to settle before going to trial. But I already knew how it would end. The mediator, Janet Reynolds, was 58, with short gray hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She had been a family court judge for 20 years before retiring to mediation work. Catherine sat behind me, notebook open. Connor sat across the table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wood grain in front of him. Melissa sat beside him, pale and silent. Roland Pierce, Connor's attorney, wore a dark suit and a carefully neutral expression. Reynolds opened a manila folder and glanced at the documents inside. Good afternoon. I'm here to facilitate a settlement between Mr. Thomas Blackwood and Mr. Connor Blackwood. Let's begin with opening statements. Mr. Pierce, you may go first. Roland cleared his throat and straightened his tie. Ms. Reynolds, my client Connor Blackwood is suing his father for unlawful seizure of $500,000 from a trust fund. Thomas withdrew this money in retaliation for words spoken in anger. He paused, glancing at Connor. Connor regrets what he said, but words, however hurtful, do not justify taking $500,000. Connor is facing financial hardship. He has debts. He has children to support. An IRS audit is costing him nearly $100,000 in penalties and back taxes. We're asking for the return of the $500,000 plus $50,000 in damages for emotional distress. Reynolds made a note and turned to Douglas. Mr. Freeman. Douglas leaned forward, his voice calm and measured. Ms. Reynolds, my client did not steal anything. The trust fund was established by Thomas Blackwood, funded by Thomas Blackwood, and remained in his name. He had every legal right to withdraw it. What Connor did at that party was not speaking harshly. It was public humiliation, and we have video evidence. Roland shifted in his seat. Connor did not look up. Douglas continued. Over 40 years, Thomas invested more than $500,000 in Connor's education, housing, business ventures, and family support. In return, Connor called him disgusting in public in front of 65 witnesses, and then sued him for $600,000. We are countersuing for $325,000 under the legal doctrine of revocation of gifts due to gross ingratitude. Reynolds set her pen down. Mr. Freeman, you mentioned video evidence. May I see it? Of course. Douglas opened his laptop and connected it to the flat screen mounted on the wall. The room darkened slightly as the screen flickered to life. The video began. 30 seconds. Connor stood at the microphone in Silverstone Hall champagne glass in one hand, the other gesturing toward the crowd. His voice was clear and confident. "Everyone, let's give a round of applause to my mother's awakening." Applause rippled through the hall. "Congratulations to the woman who successfully threw away the most rotten and disgusting debt she ever had." Connor paused, turned, and looked directly toward table 12. "The man standing right here, whom I once had to call father." Laughter, more applause. A voice in the background. Preston Montgomery shouted encouragement. The camera panned briefly to Thomas, sitting alone at table 12, his face frozen in shock, then emptying into something hollow. 3 seconds later, the video ended. The screen went black. The room was silent. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Reynolds removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at Connor. "Mr. Blackwood, you called your father the most rotten and disgusting debt in front of dozens of people, on camera, and 3 days later, you sued him for money." Connor's face flushed red. "I was angry. I didn't mean—" "Mr. Blackwood." Reynolds interrupted, her voice firm, but not unkind. "Intent matters, but so does impact. And what I just saw on that video, that's not a momentary lapse. That's a calculated statement made in a public forum." She turned to Roland Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, I'll be frank. Your client's case is extremely weak. This video demonstrates what the law calls gross ingratitude, a recognized legal basis for revoking gifts." Roland straightened. "Ms. Reynolds, my client's words were inappropriate, but they don't negate his legal claim to the trust fund." Douglas leaned forward. "The trust fund was Mr. Blackwood's property. Connor had no vested legal right until Thomas chose to transfer it. And after that video, Thomas exercised his legal right to protect his assets." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Mr. Freeman is correct. The doctrine of gross ingratitude applies here. I've seen dozens of family disputes, but this—" She glanced at the blank screen. "This is one of the clearest cases I've encountered." Melissa wiped her eyes with a tissue. Catherine exhaled quietly behind me. Connor kept his head down. Reynolds opened her folder again and pulled out a blank settlement form. "Let me propose a solution. Mr. Thomas Blackwood keeps the $500,000. Mr. Connor Blackwood drops his lawsuit. In exchange, Connor agrees to pay Thomas $150,000 over 10 years, $15,000 per year, as partial repayment for the financial support Thomas provided over the years." Roland Pierce frowned. $150,000, that's generous, Mr. Pierce," Reynolds said sharply. "Given the video and the legal doctrine, Mr. Blackwood could ask for much more, and he'd likely win." She looked at Connor. "Mr. Blackwood, Connor?" Connor glanced at Melissa. She nodded, barely perceptible. He swallowed. I'll consider it." Reynolds turned to me. "Mr. Blackwood Thomas." I sat in silence for 5 seconds, looking at Connor across the table. His shoulders were hunched. His hands trembled slightly. He looked older than 40, tired, defeated. "No," I said. Reynolds blinked. "No, I want a trial," I said quietly. "I want a judge to hear the full story, the video, the evidence, the manipulation. I want Connor to take responsibility, not just with money, with accountability." "Dad, please," Connor began. I cut him off. "You called me disgusting, Connor, in public. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could seize control of my assets. You used Logan and Isabella as leverage, dropping them at my door like pawns. And now you want me to settle quietly? No, I want a trial." Douglas closed his laptop. "My client declines the settlement, Ms. Reynolds. We'll see you in court." Reynolds sighed and made a final note. "Very well. The trial is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. June 28th, 10 o'clock in the morning, District Court Judge Sarah Whitman presiding." She stood gathering her papers. "Gentlemen, I urge you both to reconsider. Trials are expensive, they're public, and they leave permanent records. But if this is what you want—" She looked at me, then at Connor. "Good luck." We filed out of the conference room into the hallway. Douglas walked ahead with Catherine, discussing next steps. I was almost to the elevator when I heard Connor's voice behind me. "Dad, wait." I stopped, turned around. He stood 10 feet away, Melissa beside him, her hand on his arm. Connor looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, older, "Hey, Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I messed up, but please, don't do this. Don't take me to trial." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the boy who used to build towers out of wooden blocks in my living room, the teenager who called me from college every Sunday, the young man who asked me to be the best man at his wedding. I thought about all of that, and then I thought about the microphone in his hand at Silverstone Hall, the laughter in the crowd, the 65 witnesses who watched him destroy me. "You should have thought of that before you called me disgusting," I said, and I walked away. Behind me, I heard Melissa's quiet voice consoling him. I heard Connor's uneven breathing. I did not turn around. Douglas held the elevator door open. Catherine stepped in beside me. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Connor, standing in the hallway, shoulders shaking, face buried in his hands. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the trial. 2 weeks until the whole world would hear what my son had done. I was ready. Before I take you into that courtroom, I need to know you are still with me. If you want to see how this ends, how a judge responds when she hears that video, type the number 1 in the comments right now. Quick note, what follows has been reconstructed from memory and shaped for storytelling. Some details are dramatized. If that does not work for you, feel free to stop here. But if you stay, you will see justice unfold. The courtroom felt like a theater where everyone had come to watch a tragedy unfold. Every seat was taken. Every eye was fixed forward. I sat beside Douglas Freeman, hands folded on the table. Across the aisle, Connor sat between Roland Pierce and Melissa. He would not look at me, and I realized this was how it would end, not with reconciliation, but with a verdict. Judge Sarah Whitman entered her black robe, crisp and formal. She was in her mid-50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a reputation for being fair but unforgiving. The bailiff called out, "All rise." We stood. When the judge sat, we sat. "Please be seated. We are here for the case of Connor Blackwood versus Thomas Blackwood, and the counterclaim filed by the defendant. Let's begin with opening statements. Mr. Pierce, say easies." Roland Pierce stood smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, this is a case about a father who used money as a weapon. Thomas Blackwood established a trust fund for his son, $500,000. Connor believed that money was his security. But when Connor spoke words his father did not like, Thomas took it all back. In one night. 3 taps on a phone. Gone. Yes, Connor spoke harshly, but words, even cruel words, do not justify taking $500,000. We are asking this court to order Thomas to return that money and compensate Connor for emotional distress. Roland sat down. Judge Whitman nodded. "Mr. Freeman." Douglas stood, but stayed at our table, one hand resting on a folder. "Your Honor, this is not a story about money. This is a story about betrayal and gratitude, and one father's act of self-preservation." He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Thomas Blackwood gave his son everything: college and graduate school tuition, a down payment on a house, investments in a failed business, a car, a wedding, support for his grandchildren. Over 40 years, Thomas invested more than $500,000 into Connor's life. He paused, letting the number settle. And what did he get in return? Public humiliation. Your Honor, we are invoking the legal doctrine of revocation of gifts due to gross ingratitude. This doctrine is recognized under common law. The standard is high. It is not mere rudeness. It must be conduct so severe that it shocks the conscience and fundamentally violates the donor-recipient relationship. Douglas gestured towards Connor. Your Honor, we have video evidence. Connor Blackwood stood on a stage in front of 65 witnesses and called his father the most rotten and disgusting debt. All that is not a son speaking in anger. That is gross ingratitude under the law. We are asking this court to rule in my client's favor and to order Connor Blackwood to repay $325,000 as partial restitution. Judge Whitman leaned forward. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I understand you have video evidence. Yes, Your Honor. Let's see it. Douglas connected his laptop to the screen. The courtroom lights dimmed. Douglas pressed play. The video began. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. White roses spilled from centerpieces. Connor stood at the microphone, his expression serious and composed. A round of applause for my mother's awakening. A few people clapped uncertainly. Connor continued, his voice stronger. Congratulations to the woman who successfully threw away the most rotten and disgusting debt she ever had. He paused, turned, pointed toward the back of the room. The camera zoomed out. Thomas Blackwood sat at table 12, the farthest table from the stage, alone except for Catherine beside him. Connor finished. The man standing right here, whom I once had to call father. Laughter erupted from at least 15 to 20 guests. Angela raised her champagne glass and smiled. Daniel Rowan laughed and clapped Connor on the shoulder. Preston Montgomery applauded loudly. Some guests remained silent, their expressions uncomfortable. The camera shifted to Thomas at table 12. He sat motionless. His hands trembled slightly. His face showed pain, then shock, then emptiness. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Oh, the video ended. The courtroom was silent. Then whispers began. Someone said, "That's horrible." Several people looked at Connor with expressions of disappointment. Connor sat with his head bowed. Melissa was crying. Catherine wiped tears from her cheeks. Ava shook her head slowly. Judge Whitman watched the screen even after it had gone dark. Her expression was stern. Douglas let the silence stretch. Then he stood. "Your Honor, this is the evidence, the plaintiff's own words, spoken in public, recorded, witnessed by 65 people. He called his father the most rotten and disgusting debt. 3 days later, Connor Blackwood sued his father for $500,000. Your Honor, that is not a son seeking justice. That is gross ingratitude, the very conduct this court is empowered to remedy." Roland Pierce stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client was emotional, words spoken in anger." Douglas cut him off. "Anger, counselor. That was 30 seconds of calculated public cruelty, witnessed, recorded, laughed at. That was not anger. That was a choice." Judge Whitman raised her hand. "Mr. Pierce, I will hear your rebuttal later. Right now, I want to hear from Mr. Thomas Blackwood. Mr. Freeman, call your witness." The defense calls Thomas Blackwood. I stood. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." And I sat down. Douglas stood a few feet away. "Mr. Blackwood, why did you withdraw the $500,000 from the trust account?" I looked at Judge Whitman. "Your Honor, I did not do it to punish my son. I did it to protect myself. For 42 years, I gave everything I had to my family. I thought that was what love meant. Sacrifice. Giving without expecting anything in return. But after that night, after hearing those words, I realized something." I glanced at Connor. "My son did not see me as a father. He saw me as a debt, a burden, something to be thrown away. I withdrew the money because I wanted to live, not for him, for me. For the first time in my life, I chose myself." The courtroom was silent. Several people nodded. Catherine smiled through her tears. Connor's shoulders shook. Judge Whitman made a note. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Pierce, your witness." Roland Pierce stood. "Your Honor, I would like to call my next witness, Angela Rowan." The courtroom went silent. After 4 years since the divorce, she was here, and she was going to testify against me. Angela walked through the side door of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor. I had not seen her in 4 years. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with more gray. She looked older, tired. When she raised her hand to take the oath, I saw the wedding ring Daniel had given her, the kind of ring I had never been able to afford. She sat down on the witness stand, folded her hands in her lap, and looked straight ahead. Not at me, never at me. Roland Pierce approached. "Mrs. Rowan, how long were you married to Thomas Blackwood?" "A's Wandiwans Moia, 42 years. "And during that time, how would you describe your relationship?" Angela's voice was calm, practiced. "Thomas was a good provider, but he was controlling. Everything had to be his way. The house, the money, how we raised Connor. I felt trapped for most of our marriage. I felt Catherine stiffen beside me. Douglas made a note on his legal pad. And when did you leave? Roland asked. 4 years ago. I met Daniel Rowan. He showed me what it was like to be respected, to have a voice. I filed for divorce and started over. Mrs. Rowan, in your opinion, did Thomas use money to control Connor? Yes, always. He gave Connor things, but there were always strings attached, always expectations. Connor felt like he could never be his own person. Roland nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Rowan. No further questions. Judge Whitman looked at Douglas. Your witness, Mr. Freeman. Douglas stood slowly picking up a folder from the table. He walked to the center of the room and opened it. Mrs. Rowan, you said you felt trapped in your marriage. Is that correct? Yes. But you stayed for 42 years. I did. And during those 42 years, did Mr. Blackwood ever prevent you from working, from having your own bank account, from seeing your friends or family? Angela hesitated. No, but... So you were free to leave at any time. You simply chose not to. It wasn't that simple. Douglas pulled a document from the folder. Mrs. Rowan, you filed for divorce in January of 2020. Is that correct? Yes. And as part of the divorce settlement, you received $280,000 in assets, cash retirement accounts, and half the value of the family home. Correct, Usburied. Angela's expression hardened. Yes. $280,000. That's a significant amount. Would you say Mr. Blackwood was generous in the settlement? Yeah, it was what I was entitled to. Of course. Douglas set the document on the judge's bench. Mrs. Rowan, when did you meet Daniel Rowan? I told you, 4 years ago. Before or after you filed for divorce? Angela paused. Before. How long before? I don't remember exactly. Douglas pulled out another document. Your Honor, this is a credit card statement from November 2019, 2 months before Mrs. Rowan filed for divorce. It shows charges at a hotel in Portland, 2 rooms booked under the names Angela Blackwood and Daniel Rowan. The courtroom went silent. Mrs. Rowan, Douglas said quietly, were you having an affair with Daniel Rowan while you were still married to Thomas Blackwood? Angela looked down at her hands. We were separated emotionally. That's not what I asked. Were you having an affair? Yes. Douglas nodded. Thank you for your honesty. One more question. How old is Daniel Rowan? 48. And you are 65, so Daniel is 15 years younger than you. Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Rowan. No further questions. Angela left the witness stand quickly, her face flushed. She did not look at anyone as she returned to her seat in the gallery. Judge Whitman called for a short recess. When we reconvened, Roland Pierce looked shaken. Douglas looked calm. Your Honor. Douglas said, I'd like to call my next witness, Marcus Sullivan, IRS, criminal investigator. A man in his 40s wearing a dark suit and glasses walked to the witness stand. He carried a briefcase and set it on the small table beside the chair. Douglas approached. Mr. Sullivan, can you explain your role with the IRS? I am a criminal investigator with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I investigate cases of tax fraud evasion and other financial crimes. And are you currently investigating Connor Blackwood? Yes. Can you summarize your findings? Marcus Sullivan opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick report. Over the past 3 years, Connor Blackwood reported business losses totaling $190,000. He claimed these losses were from a startup technology company. However, our investigation revealed that no such company exists. There is no business license, no tax identification number, no incorporation documents. Mr. Blackwood fabricated the entire business to reduce his taxable income. The courtroom buzzed. Connor sat motionless, staring at the table. What else did you find? Douglas asked. Mr. Blackwood also claimed business travel expenses for trips to Hawaii and Europe. He wrote these off as work-related. But according to his employer, Montgomery and Associates, Mr. Blackwood never traveled for business. These were personal vacations. What are the consequences? Mr. Blackwood faces penalties of approximately $95,000. Additionally, the case has been referred to the Department of Justice for potential criminal prosecution. Tax fraud is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Douglas thanked him and sat down. Roland Pierce declined to cross-examine. The final witness was Catherine. She walked to the stand with her head held high, and when she took the oath, her voice was clear and unwavering. Douglas asked her a single question. Ms. Blackwood, can you tell the court about Preston Montgomery? Catherine nodded. 25 years ago, my brother Thomas testified in a civil lawsuit against Preston Montgomery. Preston was accused of fraud. Thomas's testimony was key to the case. Preston lost and was ordered to pay $1.2 million in damages. He nearly went bankrupt. And what relevance does this have to the current case? 2 years ago, Preston hired Connor Blackwood. He bypassed the normal hiring process. He brought Connor in personally, even though there were more qualified candidates. A former employee, Marcus Reed, told me that Preston used to pull Connor into his office every Friday. He would tell Connor that Thomas had destroyed his career, that Thomas was a liar and a fraud. He manipulated Connor for 2 years, turning him against his father. This was revenge. Connor was just a pawn. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Connor looked at Preston Montgomery, who sat in the back row, his face pale. Judge Whitman banged her gavel. Order! When the room quieted, the judge looked at Connor. Mr. Blackwood, do you have anything to say? Connor stood slowly, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth, and for the first time in 3 months, he looked directly at me. Dad! His voice broke. But whether it was remorse or desperation, I could not tell. And I was not sure I wanted to know. The judge's gavel fell. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. And just like that, it was over. 40 years of sacrifice. 3 months of legal battles. 1 verdict. And I was free. Judge Sarah Whitman sat upright, her expression stern and composed. She looked down at the papers spread before her, then lifted her gaze to the courtroom. I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case. The video recording, the testimony from multiple witnesses, the IRS report, the financial records, the legal arguments on both sides. And I have reached a decision. The room went silent. I felt Catherine's hand squeeze mine under the table. Mr. Connor Blackwood, your lawsuit against your father is dismissed. Connor flinched as if he had been struck. You claim that Thomas Blackwood unlawfully seized $500,000 from a trust fund. However, the evidence is clear. This trust was established by your father, funded entirely by your father, and remained in his legal name at all times. You had no vested legal right to those funds until your father chose to formally transfer ownership. He withdrew the funds before any such transfer occurred. Therefore, your claim of unlawful seizure has no legal merit. Judge Whitman paused, letting the words settle. On the counterclaim brought by Mr. Thomas Blackwood, I am ruling in his favor. Douglas Freeman sat perfectly still beside me. Catherine exhaled softly. Mr. Freeman has invoked the doctrine of revocation of gifts due to gross ingratitude. This doctrine is rooted in common law. While rarely applied, courts within this jurisdiction have upheld its use where a recipient's conduct constitutes deliberate and egregious ingratitude, resulting in demonstrable harm. It has been recognized in this jurisdiction and upheld in numerous cases over the past century. The doctrine states that a donor may revoke gifts or seek restitution when the recipient demonstrates extreme ingratitude conduct, so egregious that it fundamentally violates the relationship and shocks the conscience of a reasonable person. She looked directly at Connor. The standard is high. This court does not intervene in ordinary family disputes or disagreements, but this case exceeds that threshold. Judge Whitman picked up a printed transcript. The evidence before me is compelling. On March 23rd of this year, at a public celebration attended by 65 guests, Connor Blackwood made the following statement about his father, and I quote from the video record, "The most rotten and disgusting debt she ever had, the man standing right here, whom I once had to call father." She set the transcript down. This was not a private conversation. This was not a momentary outburst in the heat of an argument. This was a deliberate, calculated statement made at a celebration in front of dozens of witnesses, while the plaintiff's father sat alone at a table in the back of the room. The video shows that this statement was met with laughter and applause from some guests. It shows the pain on Mr. Thomas Blackwood's face. And it shows that 3 days later, Connor Blackwood filed a lawsuit demanding $600,000. Her voice hardened. Such conduct constitutes gross ingratitude under the law. It meets the standard. It exceeds the standard. Connor slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Melissa was crying quietly beside him. Roland Pierce stared down at his notes, his jaw tight. The evidence further shows that over the course of 40 years, Thomas Blackwood invested more than $500,000 in his son's life. Education, housing, business ventures, family support. I am ordering Connor Blackwood to repay his father the sum of $325,000. This represents partial restitution for the gifts and support provided over 4 decades. Judge Whitman made a note on her legal pad. This amount will be paid over a period of 10 years with an annual interest rate of 4%. Additionally, Mr. Connor Blackwood will pay all court costs and attorney fees incurred by both parties in this litigation. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Mr. Blackwood, let me be clear. Children are not entitled to their parents' wealth. Gifts are privileges, not rights. And when those gifts are met with cruelty, public humiliation, and disrespect, the law permits the donor to seek remedy. Your father gave you opportunities that many people never receive. And you responded by calling him disgusting in front of dozens of people. That has consequences. She lifted her gavel. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell again, final and absolute. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs. A few people in the gallery clapped softly before Judge Whitman's sharp glance silenced them. Connor sat motionless, staring at the table, his shoulders shaking. Melissa buried her face in her hands. Roland Pierce began packing his briefcase with swift, angry movements. Catherine wrapped her arms around me. Ava leaned in from the row behind, her hand on my shoulder. Douglas Freeman extended his hand and I shook it. Congratulations, Thomas, you won. I nodded, but the word felt hollow. I had not won. I had survived, and there was a difference. It's over, I said quietly. I'm finally free. In the courthouse hallway, the afternoon light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Connor emerged from the courtroom, Melissa, a step behind him, her eyes red and swollen. Near the elevators, Preston Montgomery stood with his phone in hand, scrolling through messages. Connor walked toward him. Preston, I need to talk to you. Preston looked up, his expression cold. Connor, as of today, your employment with Montgomery and Associates is terminated. Connor froze. What, but you're a liability. The IRS, the lawsuit, the video. I can't have that associated with my firm. Preston stepped into the elevator without looking back. The doors closed. Connor stood there staring at the closed doors. Melissa touched his arm, but he did not respond. Roland Pierce emerged from the courtroom a moment later, his briefcase in hand. Connor turned to him, desperation creeping into his voice. Now, Roland, we need to talk about the fees. Roland cut him off. My invoice is $52,000. You have 30 days to pay in full. If I don't receive payment, I'll file a lien against your house. He walked past Connor without another word. Connor stood alone in the hallway, his face blank with shock. Melissa leaned against the wall, crying softly. I walked past them without stopping. Outside, the summer air was warm and thick. Douglas, Catherine, Ava, and I stood on the courthouse steps, the city stretching out before us. What will you do now? Douglas asked. And live, I said, for the first time in a long time. Catherine looked at me. What about Logan and Isabella? I'll set up education funds, $75,000 each. You'll manage it, Catherine. Pay directly to schools when they are ready. Connor doesn't get to touch it. Ava smiled. I'm proud of you, Dad. We walked to the parking lot together. I drove home alone, the windows down, the radio off, the silence around me like a blanket. 4 months later, I received a letter. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. I opened it standing at my kitchen counter, the autumn light streaming through the window. Dad, I lost everything. The house, the job. Melissa left me. Please, I need to see you. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the sink. I closed the drawer and stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the counter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 7 months after the trial, I stood in my new studio. The walls were lined with half-finished paintings. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil filled the air. A window overlooked the park where bare trees stood like sentinels against the January sky. The space was small. It was messy. It was mine. And for the first time in 67 years, I was happy. For 67 years, I had lived for other people. My parents, my wife, my children. I thought that was what love meant. I thought that was duty. But now, standing in this converted garage on the edge of town, I was learning something new. I was learning to live for myself. The studio had been Catherine's idea. After the trial, after the dust settled and the verdict was filed and Connor's appeal was denied, she had said, "Thomas, what are you going to do now?" And I had not known how to answer. So she had driven me to this place, a small property with a detached garage that the owner was willing to rent for almost nothing. "Paint," she had said. "Do something that's just for you." So I did. The canvases leaning against the walls were clumsy, amateurish. A winter landscape, a still life of apples in a wooden bowl, a portrait of Catherine that looked more like a stranger. But they were mine. The brushes, the colors, the quiet, the freedom to create without asking anyone's permission. I was not alone in this new chapter. 3 months ago, I had signed up for a painting class at the community center. The instructor was a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a widow in her early 60s with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. She had been an art teacher for 30 years, before retiring, and she still taught 1 class a week. Because, as she put it, I can't imagine not having paint under my nails. Sarah stood beside my easel, now studying the canvas I had been working on. A view of the park in winter, the trees heavy with snow. "Thomas, that's beautiful. The way you captured the light on the snow." "Thank you. I'm still learning." "Aren't we all?" After class, we walked to the coffee shop across the street, a routine we had fallen into over the past few weeks. Sarah ordered a cappuccino. I ordered black coffee. "You seem different today," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Lighter than when I first met you." I let go of something heavy. "A person. A burden." She nodded, understanding without needing details. That was what I liked about Sarah. She did not pry. She simply listened. "I went to Portland last week," I said. "With my daughter Ava. We spent 3 days at the art museum. I haven't done something like that in I can't remember how long." "How was it?" "Overwhelming, in a good way. Ava said I looked different, happier." Sarah smiled. "You are." The next weekend, Catherine brought Logan and Isabella to my house. They had been living with Melissa and her sister since the trial, visiting Connor on weekends when he was available, which according to Logan was not often. I opened the door, and they rushed in, their voices bright and loud in the quiet house. "Grandpa, we missed you." Isabella threw her arms around my waist. "I missed you too, sweetheart." Logan stood a step behind, taller now, almost as tall as I was. He smiled, but there was something guarded in his expression, something older than 13. We drove to the park, where the snow had melted enough to expose patches of grass and the basketball court. Logan and I shot hoops while Isabella collected pine cones near the playground. The afternoon was cold, but clear, the kind of winter day that feels clean and sharp. Logan missed a shot, and the ball bounced toward me. I caught it and held it for a moment. "How's your dad?" I asked. Logan's expression tightened. "He's okay. He moved to a small apartment. We only see him on weekends now." "And how is he, really?" Logan looked down at his sneakers. "He's different, quieter. He doesn't smile much. Mom says he's depressed, but he won't go to a therapist." Logan hesitated, then added quietly, "Mom still talks to him sometimes. You know about pickup schedules and stuff. She says he's not doing well." I passed the ball back to him. "I'm sorry, Logan." "Grandpa, why did you and Dad fight?" I had known this question would come eventually. I just had not been ready for it. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "But I want you to know something. None of this is your fault, or Isabella's. You're innocent in all of this. But you're not talking to him, and he's not talking to you, and we're stuck in the middle. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But Logan, sometimes relationships break. Sometimes people hurt each other so badly that there's no way to fix it. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. Or Isabella. You'll always be welcome here. Logan nodded slowly. Can we come visit you more? Anytime you want. That evening, after Catherine had driven the kids home, she stayed for tea. I handed her a check across the kitchen table. What's this? She asked, looking at the amount. $150,000. A scholarship fund. $75,000 for Logan. $75,000 for Isabella. I want you to manage it. Pay their tuition directly to the schools. Pay for their books, their supplies, their activities. But Connor and Melissa can't touch it. Catherine set the check down carefully. Thomas, this is very generous. They're innocent, Catherine. They didn't choose any of this. They deserve a future. What if Connor asks for help? Then you tell him the money is for the kids, not for him. 1 week later, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Thomas, it's Angela. I was silent for 3 seconds, processing the sound of her voice. I had not heard it in nearly a year. Angela, I wanted to talk about the trial, about Connor, about everything. There's nothing to talk about, Angela. Thomas, please, I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But Daniel, he left me for someone else. And Connor, he's falling apart. I don't know what to do. I close my eyes. Part of me, a small, distant part, felt a flicker of sympathy. But it was not enough. Angela, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you. Not anymore. So you're just done after 42 years. You were done 4 years ago. I'm just catching up. Her voice broke. I didn't mean for it to end like this. Neither did I, but it did, and I've moved on. I think you should too. Can we at least meet for coffee just to talk? No, Angela, I've moved forward, and I need you to stay in the past. I'm sorry. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond. Catherine, who had been sitting across from me during the call, raised her eyebrows. Daniel left her? Apparently. Well, she said dryly, what goes around comes around. Maybe, but that's not my concern anymore. 11 months after the trial, on a cold February morning, my doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the sound cut through the quiet. I set down the pot and walked to the front door, expecting a package or a neighbor. I opened the door, and there he was, Connor. He stood on my porch, his coat too thin for the weather, his face thinner than I remembered. His eyes were hollow-shadowed. He looked like a ghost of the man I used to know. "'Tis Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I stood there, my hand on the door, the cold air rushing in around us. And for the first time in a year, I did not know what to do. I stood in the doorway, looking at the man who used to be my son. 40 years of memory flickered behind my eyes. His first steps across this floor. His graduation photo in the hallway. But the person on my porch looked like a stranger. Connor stood 3 feet away, his shoulders hunched, his face gaunt and shadowed. His eyes, once sharp and defiant, now carried the hollow emptiness of someone who had lost everything and understood finally why. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands trembled. Finally he spoke. "Dad, can I come in just 5 minutes, please?" I stepped aside. He walked past me into the living room, stopped in front of the couch but did not sit. I closed the door and stood near the bookshelf, arms folded, waiting. Connor looked at me. He took a breath. "I don't know where to start. I've been rehearsing this for weeks, but now that I'm here..." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For what I said at the party, for the lawsuit, for believing them." I said nothing. I had learned over 11 months the power of silence. He continued, his voice gaining strength through desperation. "I know you won in court. I know the judge ruled against me, but I need you to hear this from me. What I did, what I said, it was unforgivable. I called you disgusting. I accused you of being a burden. I stood up in front of 65 people, and I humiliated you, the man who paid for my education, who put a roof over my head, who never gave up on me even when I gave you every reason to." His voice broke. "Even when I gave you every reason to." He sat down heavily on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I remained standing. Preston lied to me. Connor said quietly. Every Friday for 2 years, he pulled me into his office. He told me you destroyed his career. He told me you were manipulative, that you only gave money to control people. And Mom, he looked up at me, eyes wet. Mom kept saying the same things. She'd call me every week and they'd tell me how much better her life was now that she was free. They made it sound like freedom meant cutting you out completely. I walked to the window, looked out at the street. A robin landed on the fence. I believed them, Connor said behind me. I wanted to believe them because it was easier than admitting I was jealous. Jealous that you were still successful after the divorce. Jealous that you didn't fall apart. And when Preston offered me a way to get back at you, when he suggested I could access that trust fund, if I could prove you were losing your mind, I told myself I was protecting my kids. But I wasn't. I was just angry and broke and stupid. I turned around. Connor was crying now, silently, his shoulders shaking. I lost everything, Dad. Melissa left me. I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment near the airport. I can't see Logan and Isabella, except on supervised visits. The IRS is investigating me. I owe you $325,000 I'll never be able to pay back. Preston fired me the day we lost in court. I don't have a career. I don't have a family. I don't have anything. He looked up at me, his face raw. And I deserve all of it. I know I do. But I need to say this. I need you to know I understand now. You weren't the problem. I was. The words hung in the air. I walked over to the armchair across from him and sat down. Honor, I said quietly, I've spent 11 months thinking about this moment, wondering if you'd ever come, wondering what I would say if you did. He looked at me, waiting, hope flickering across his face. I forgive you, I said. His breath caught. But I can't forget, I continued, my voice steady. And I can't let you back into my life. The hope died. He stared at me. You hurt me in a way I didn't know was possible. You stood in front of everyone I know, and you called me worthless. You tried to take my money, my dignity, my sanity. You used your children, my grandchildren, as weapons. And I understand now that you were manipulated. I understand Preston used you, that your mother poisoned you against me, that you were under financial pressure. I understand all of that, but understanding doesn't erase what happened. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I spent 40 years of my life building a relationship with you. I gave you everything I had, time, money, love, patience, and you threw it away for a man who hated me and a woman who wanted revenge. You made a choice, Connor. You chose to believe the worst about me without ever asking my side. You chose cruelty over compassion. And now, you have to live with that choice the same way I have to live with mine. What choice? He whispered. To let you go, I said simply. To save myself instead of trying to save you. His face crumpled. He covered it with his hands. I will keep supporting Logan and Isabella, I said after a moment. Catherine manages their education funds. $75,000 each paid directly to their schools. They visit me every week. They're good kids, Connor. They didn't ask for any of this. But that support goes through Catherine, not through you. Do you understand? He nodded, still covering his face. And I'll tell you this. You can rebuild. You're 40 years old. You lost a lot, but you're not dead. You can find a new job, pay off your debts, repair your relationship with your kids. But you have to do it on your own. Not with my money, not with my help. You have to prove to yourself, not to me, that you can be the man you were supposed to be. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red. Do you think I can? I looked at him for a long moment. I don't know, but I hope so. He nodded slowly. He wiped his face, stood up, and walked toward the door. I followed him. At the threshold, he turned. Thank you for listening, and for forgiving me even if you can't forget. Take care of yourself, Connor, I said. He stepped onto the porch and walked toward the street. I watched him reach his car, a battered sedan with a dented bumper. Then I closed the door. The house was silent. I stood in the entryway for a minute, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of 4 years lift and settle into something manageable. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and looked out the window at the backyard. I felt free. And to you listening to this story, remember this family betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it starts quietly, a missed phone call, a cold shoulder, a whispered lie. I lived 40 years believing that unconditional love meant giving endlessly no matter the cost. I was wrong. Looking back on my own family story, I see now what I wish I had understood sooner. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges built on respect. When I gave Connor everything, tuition, housing, business, capital, trust, I thought I was building his future, but I forgot to teach him accountability. I forgot to show him that love without respect is just debt waiting to be resented. If I could speak to my younger self, I would say this: do not pour yourself into people who see you as a resource, not a person. Do not mistake silence for peace. And when someone shows you who they are through cruelty, manipulation, or family betrayal, believe them the first time. God gave me 40 years to learn that lesson. It took a microphone, 65 witnesses, and a courtroom to finally hear it. My family story is not unique. Family betrayal happens every day in living rooms, at dinner tables, in legal offices across this country. If you are living through something similar, know this: choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. And forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means letting go of the power someone once had over you. I am 70 years old now. I paint, I travel, I see my grandchildren every week. I am free, and that freedom cost me everything and nothing at the same time. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to this channel for more family stories that remind us what really matters. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to the very end. I know these stories are not easy to hear. A gentle reminder: the stories shared here may contain fictionalized elements crafted for reflection and insight. If this content does not align with your preferences, feel free to explore other videos that better suit your needs. Take care of yourself. And remember, you are worth more than what you give.